There is a reason certain families in the Ottoman Empire maintained extraordinary wealth across 12 consecutive generations, while entire kingdoms crumbled around them. It was not land. It was not armies. It was not gold stored beneath floors. It was a single name, a specific, sacred name, written on a small piece of paper and placed at the threshold of every home they ever occupied. I know this because my great-grandmother carried this knowledge across 3 countries, wrapped in a cloth older than my imagination, and she passed it to my grandmother, who passed it to my mother, who sat me down at the age of 14 and said something I have never forgotten. She said that the door of a home is not wood and hinges. It is a mouth, and what you place upon it determines what it speaks into your life. I have spent 37 years studying the ancient Persian and Ottoman mystical traditions that gave birth to this practice. My great-grandmother, Zumrut, was the daughter of a dervish scholar in a province that no longer exists on any modern map. She was not a woman of superstition. She was a woman of precision. She documented everything she knew in a journal written in 3 languages, and that journal eventually reached my hands. What I found inside changed the entire direction of my adult life, and today, after decades of silence, I am going to share with you the exact method she preserved. Before I reveal the name, I need you to understand something. This is not about belief in the way you might expect. This is about mechanics. The ancient scholars who developed this practice were not mystics sitting in caves imagining things. They were observers. They watched how energy moved. They studied how wealth accumulated and how it vanished. They noticed patterns that repeated across centuries, across cultures, across completely unrelated communities. And what they discovered was that the threshold of a home acts as a filter. Whatever symbolic information you place at that threshold becomes a kind of instruction to the invisible architecture of your circumstances. If you have ever felt like money comes in and disappears before you can hold it, if you have ever worked harder than the people around you and still fallen further behind, if you have ever sat in a quiet room and genuinely wondered what you are doing wrong, then what I am about to tell you is specifically for you. Not because I am selling you something, not because I want anything from you, but because Zumrut made my mother promise, and my mother made me promise, that when the time was right, this knowledge would be given freely to those who were prepared to receive it. Stay with me until the very end. If you miss one detail, the method will not work. Every element has a function. Every step activates something specific. This is not decoration. This is engineering. The name I am about to give you comes from a tradition called the Hurufi doctrine, an esoteric school of thought that flourished in Anatolia and Persia during the 14th and 15th centuries. The Hurufis believed with extraordinary sophistication that the letters and names of reality were not arbitrary sounds. They were structural codes embedded into the fabric of existence itself. They believed that specific names, when written with intention and placed at specific locations, could recalibrate the energetic signature of an entire household. Not metaphorically, literally. The scholars of this tradition spent lifetimes cataloguing which names produced which effects. They tested, they documented, they revised. What survived that process, what was considered reliable enough to pass forward through generations, was a very short list of names connected to very specific outcomes. The name associated with the restoration of financial flow, with the opening of unexpected channels of provision, with the breaking of what they called the iron ceiling of stagnation. That name is Ruzael. Ruzael. Say it slowly. Ru-ze-el. It has no direct translation in any modern language, but its root structure in the Proto-Semitic languages from which the Hurufi scholars worked connects to the concepts of flowing water, of gates opening, of the moment before dawn when the sky shifts from black to the color of copper. It is the name given to the principle of threshold crossing, the moment of transition from scarcity into movement. The ancient scholars described it as the name that teaches a door how to be a door again, how to allow what has been blocked to finally pass through. I first used this method when I was 26 years old. I had just left a position I thought was secure. I had savings that lasted 4 months, and then nothing. I remember sitting in my apartment in a city where I knew almost no one, going through the motions of applying for work and hearing nothing back, watching my account drain with a kind of sick, mechanical regularity. I had read my great-grandmother's journal by then, but I had treated it as history, as artifact, as something that belonged to a different world. It was my mother who called me one evening and said, "Stop treating the knowledge like a museum piece. Use it." I followed the instructions Zumrud had written. 7 days later, a client I had worked with 2 years prior contacted me out of nowhere with a project that paid me 3 times my previous monthly salary. 2 days after that, a friend I had lost touch with called to tell me he had finally repaid a debt I had honestly forgotten about. Within 3 weeks, I had more active income streams than I had managed in the previous 2 years combined. I am not telling you this to impress you. I am telling you this because Zumrud documented almost identical sequences of events in the stories of every household that applied this method across the generations she observed. The pattern is not random. Now I am going to give you the exact steps. Before you begin, prepare yourself with this understanding. Intention is not a feeling. Intention is a direction. You are not hoping something happens. You are doing something specific to produce a specific result. Hold that frame throughout every step. Step 1. Take a clean piece of paper. White is ideal, but any light-colored paper that has not been used for anything else will work. You are going to write the name Ruzael in the center of the paper. Write it in clear, deliberate letters. Do not rush this. As you write each letter, think of one specific thing you want money to make possible in your life. Not money in the abstract, something concrete. A debt cleared, a bill paid, an opportunity pursued. Anchor the name to something real. This specificity is what the Hurufi scholars called giving the name a body. An intention without form is like water without a vessel. It goes everywhere and accomplishes nothing. Step 2. Once you have written the name, fold the paper in half, top to bottom, then fold it again, left to right. You should now have a small folded square. Hold this square in both hands for a moment. Breathe in slowly through your nose and out through your mouth 3 times. On the 3rd exhale, speak these words aloud, even if quietly. What has been closed now opens. What has been still now flows. I am the threshold, and I am ready. These words are not decorative. In the Hurufi tradition, spoken declaration at the moment of intention setting functions as a lock being turned. You are not asking for something, you are confirming a shift that you are actively creating. Step 3. Go to the main entrance of your home, the door you use most often to enter and exit. Stand in front of it from the inside, facing outward. Take a moment to look at the right side of the door frame. Not the door itself, the frame, the vertical post on the right side as you face outward. This is the location. In every tradition that worked with threshold symbolism, from the Ottoman to the East African to the Andean, the right post of the primary entrance was considered the active side, the receiving side, the channel through which incoming energy passed. Step 4. Place the folded paper against the right door frame at approximately the height of your shoulder. You can use tape, a small piece of adhesive, a single tack, whatever you have available that will hold it in place without damaging the surface. As you press the paper against the frame, speak these words aloud. Ruzael, I place your name at my threshold. Let all that is meant for me find its way through this door. Let no channel of blessing be blocked from this home again. Speak slowly. Mean what you say. The Harufi scholars were adamant that rushed speech at this moment would dilute the effect to the point of uselessness. Step 5. After placing the paper, knock on the door frame 5 times, directly beside where you have placed the paper. 5 was the number the Harufis associated with the 5 elements of threshold: earth, water, fire, air, and the unnamed 5th thing they called the silent element, which we might today call consciousness or attention. With each knock, exhale slowly. By the 5th knock, you should feel something shift, a kind of settling, like a key finding the exact right position in a lock. Some people feel warmth. Some people feel a pressure release in their chest. Some people feel nothing unusual at all, and that is also fine. The result does not depend on what you feel in the moment. It depends on what you do. Step 6. Walk away from the door without looking back at it. This is important. In the old tradition, looking back at the threshold immediately after the placement breaks what they call the seal of forward intention. You have done what you came to do. Trust it. Go about your day. Now I want to tell you what to expect in the hours and days that follow, because this is where most people make a critical mistake. They expect the result to arrive in an obvious dramatic form. They wait for a phone call announcing a windfall. They wait for something unmistakable. And when the first signs appear in subtler forms, they dismiss them. Zumrut wrote an entire section of her journal about this error. She called it the blindness of expectation. Within the first 24 hours, pay close attention to small things. An email you almost ignored. A message from someone you had not thought about in months. A thought that arrives fully formed about something you could do, offer, or reach out about. A conversation that moves in an unexpected direction. These are not coincidences. These are the first movements of what you have activated. The Harufi scholars describe the initial phase as the clearing of debris, the energetic equivalent of water beginning to move again in a channel that had been still. It starts small. It picks up speed. Between day 2 and day 7, the results typically become more tangible. Someone repays something they owe you. An opportunity arrives from a direction you were not watching. A deal that had stalled begins to move again. An idea you had set aside suddenly becomes possible. Zumrut documented this phase as the arrival phase, and in her records, covering more than 40 households across several generations, the median time for the first significant financial arrival was 4.3 days after placement. Not weeks, days. Beyond the first week, if you have followed every step correctly and held your intention clearly, you will begin to notice something more profound than any individual arrival. You will notice that your relationship with the concept of money has changed. The anxiety that used to sit in the background of your thoughts like a persistent noise begins to quiet. Not because your circumstances have made it impossible, but because something inside you has genuinely shifted. The Harufis believed this was the deepest purpose of the practice, not to deliver a single sum of money, but to restore the practitioner's natural alignment with the principle of abundance. Once that alignment is restored, the arrivals do not stop. They become the new pattern. Now I must give you 3 warnings, because this knowledge carries responsibilities. The first warning: Do not tell anyone exactly where you have placed the paper or what name is written on it. You can tell people you have done something meaningful. You can tell them you have applied ancient knowledge. But the specific location and the specific name must remain private between you and the threshold. Zumrud was extremely clear on this point, and she connected it to a principle that appears in multiple wisdom traditions, that naming a thing too loudly, too publicly, before it has fully manifested, scatters the energy before it can consolidate. Keep it quiet. Let it work. The second warning: do not remove the paper once you have placed it. Not to clean, not to repaint, not because a guest is coming who might notice it. If you remove it, you interrupt the process mid-current, and the restart requires beginning the entire method again from the first step, in a new moment, with a fresh piece of paper. Zumrud documented several cases where people removed the paper for seemingly practical reasons, and then spent months unable to understand why their circumstances seemed to reverse. The paper is not decorative, it is functional. Leave it. The third warning: do not use this method while holding intentions of harm toward another person's financial situation. This is not a moral lecture. It is a practical observation from centuries of documentation. The name Ruzael is associated with the principle of flow, of channels opening. If the foundational intention is to take from someone else rather than to open your own channels, the practitioner documented consistent results of accelerated loss rather than gain. The energy turns inward and consumes. Use this only for opening, only for expansion, only for what is genuinely and rightfully yours to receive. I want to speak to you for a moment about why this works, because I think understanding the mechanism makes you more effective at applying it. The ancient Harufi scholars were not interested in superstition. They were interested in how attention shapes outcomes. Modern researchers in cognitive science and behavioral economics have begun to document something these scholars observed 8 centuries ago: that the way a person frames their relationship to resources fundamentally alters their ability to perceive and act on opportunities. When you perform a deliberate, meaningful ritual connected to a specific outcome, you are not casting a spell in any Hollywood sense. You are reprogramming the filter through which your attention moves through the world. You begin to notice what was always there, but previously invisible to you, because your anxiety was occupying the bandwidth that perception requires. The placement of the name at the threshold does something additional. It creates a daily, ongoing reminder, subtle but persistent, every time you pass through your own door. You do not consciously think about it, but some part of your awareness registers it, and that registration keeps the intention alive in a way that a single meditative session cannot. The threshold becomes an anchor. Every crossing reinforces the frame. This is not mysticism. This is how the mind works when given consistent, meaningful environmental cues. And yet I will not pretend that the entire mechanism is reducible to cognitive science. Zumrud believed, and the tradition she carried believed, that there is a genuine, invisible architecture to reality that responds to aligned intention in ways that exceed what any model of mind can fully account for. She was humble about this. She did not claim to understand how a debt forgotten for 6 years suddenly gets repaid within 4 days of a name being placed on a door. She only documented that it happened, repeatedly, across generations, across different cultures where the name was shared. She called it the part that is beyond explaining, and she wrote that it was enough to know that it worked, without needing to fully understand why. I think she was right, and I think that combination, the explainable and the inexplicable working together, is what makes this method something entirely different from anything you have tried before. You have been handed something today that most people will never encounter. Not because it is rare in the sense of being hidden in a vault somewhere, but because the lineage that carried it required a certain readiness in the person receiving it. Zumruut wrote that the knowledge finds its way to people at exactly the moment they are prepared to use it correctly. I choose to believe that if you are reading these words, something in your life has brought you to a point of genuine readiness. Not desperation, readiness. Those are not the same thing. Do the steps tonight or tomorrow morning before you eat or drink anything, if that is what your schedule allows. Write the name clearly. Fold the paper with intention. Speak the words with direction. Place it at the right post of your main door. Knock 5 times. Walk away. Then pay attention. Not with anxious scanning, with calm, open receptivity. The way you would watch a river after a rain, knowing the water is moving, trusting it will reach where it needs to go, without grabbing at it. Ruzail is now yours to use. The threshold is ready to become what it was always meant to be. A gate. Open.